Hello, 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 and good welcome. Today, we will be talking about common misconceptions versus reality. And my name is Maria Becerra. So why don't we get started in this wild ride of debunking myths? Alrighty, let's see what we got first. First off is the fact that we have five senses. And yes, in fact, we do have five senses. But is it only five senses that we have? Nope. Now we've been taught that we have visual, auditory, tactile, gustatory, and olfactory senses. And although this is correct, we have an extra four senses that are rarely talked about. First of all, we have proprioception, which is sensing one's orientation in space. Then we have thermoception, which, as the name kind of tells us, is the sense of temperature. Up next, we have equilibrioception, which is a sense of equilibrium or balance. And lastly, we have interoception, which is a sense of one's physiological condition. Now, a fun thing to do with this information is if you're having a conversation with someone and the topic of five senses comes up, what I would do is mention the fact that I have 9 senses, not 5 senses. Just wait for their reaction. I think it's a fun one and definitely worth to mention. Alright, moving on to another topic. We have the common misconception that lightning never strikes the same place twice. Now, I included this specific myth because this belief has become a dangerous one. It's become dangerous to the point that if lightning hit one place, then that's the safest place I can go if there is no shelter or place for me to hide from the lightning. In reality, though, lightning has been recorded to hit the same place twice. And if not the same place, it has hit within very close vicinity. And this was actually proven in 1997 in Tucson, Arizona, where researchers found that within their sample of 386 flashes, 136 flashes, so 35% of that, struck the ground in 2 or more places that were only separated by mere meters or more. So keep this in mind if you're in an area where lightning strikes pretty often. Make sure you find shelter, and make sure you're not near or touching any metal or electrical thing. Cool? Alright, let's move on. Up next we got a very sad one, if I may say, is the dog's mouths are cleaner than our mouths. Look at this poor little pug. It's so sad to hear this news, right? What will happen when people know about this? Who knows? Alright. So dogs' mouths are actually very, very dirty compared to our mouths. And this is because they have an immense number of bacteria in their mouths that allows them to fight any kind of malignant virus or anything that will harm their body. Dogs are actually known to transmit very contagious diseases, such as tetanus, rabies, and pasteurella. And there's also the fact that they lick everything. There's nothing that dogs won't put in their mouth. And if you're a dog owner, or if you've been around dogs, I'm sure you can testify to this as well. The reason why dogs put a lot of things in their mouths, or sniff or around their mouths, is because they don't have hands. They don't have those opposable thumbs that we do to grab things. So their mouths function as grabbers and also as washcloths or even toilet paper. So maybe you would think about that next time you allow a dog to lick you. Sorry for that. Sorry. Alright, next up we got, one second, there we go. We got the common misconception that houseflies live a lifespan of only 24 hours. And I mean, they are most definitely unwanted guests that annoy us like crazy. for sure. But the lifespan of flies is not 24 hours. It actually varies between 15 and 30 days. And if these houseflies are in an area which promotes and is very rewarding for them, a condition that is helpful to them, like a warm house where there's food, they can actually live up to 2 months. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. So there's two reasons why this might be a misconception. First of all, their eggs hatch within the lapse of 24 hours. And second of all, they may be confused with mayflies. Mayflies, and specific species of mayflies, live only from 5 minutes up to 24 hours. So that might be where the confusion comes in. And boy, does time fly for them, doesn't it? Alrighty, let's move on to the next one. Next up, we got the myth that bulls become angry at the color red. Interesting fact about this is that bulls and other cattle are actually colorblind. So they cannot see the color red. And the reason why they charge, specifically when you go to bull rings or you go to rodeos, and matadors are coming at them with their red capes, is because their instinct is not fight or flight. It's fight or fight. And they are very defensive animals, meaning that a matador's body language is actually what incites them to charge. I mean, who wouldn't want to charge at someone that is being just a jerk, right? Alright, next up we got the interesting fact that mice love cheese. And I mean, who doesn't like cheese? I love cheese. But they actually prefer other types of food that are very, very, very sweet. So they prefer candy or fruit over cheese any day. But where this actually came from is from the medieval times. In the medieval times, when people didn't have any refrigerators, they would hang meat from the ceiling and they would store grain in silos. But the cheese itself, how they would store it is anywhere accessible, right? And it would be either wrapped in a thin layer of wax or with cloth. And this made it very easy for rodents to access it. So it wasn't because they liked cheese and preferred cheese over other types of food. It was just because it was most accessible. And that is where that myth comes from. Look at him, just so happy. Look at that little rat, just so happy with his cheese. Alright. Next up, we got the idea or the myth that cracking knuckles actually causes arthritis. And having arthritis myself, I can't say that that's the reason I got arthritis. It just happens to be a genetic disease that I have. But in studies, in multiple studies, there actually was no correlation found. But what they did find was that with excessive cracking of the knuckles, what it did lead to was a weaker grip strength. So there's that. The reason why this might have become a myth or a misconception is that when one cracks their knuckles, what happens is that little bubbles of liquid that surround the knuckles are popped, and that liquid is released. But in studies done, this causes no trauma to the knuckle joints at all. And that trauma does not lead to an onset of inflammation, which is arthritis. So there's no need to worry about that, okay? Just take care of yourself. Okie dokes. Next up, we got the myth that goldfish have the memory of only 3 seconds. And this is something that I believed for a long time. Just seeing goldfish in fish tanks, I never wanted one just because the thought of the fish not remembering me just made me sad, honestly. Alright, well anyways, Actually has been debunked in 2009 when a team of researchers from the Israeli Technion Institute of Technology actually did an experiment with young goldfish. And what they did in this experiment is that they played a sound every time they fed the fish. So they knew that when this sound was played, they were going to be fed. They then released these goldfish into the wild. And after 5 months, the researchers went back into the wild, where the fish were released, and played the sound. And can you guess what happened? Yep, you guessed it right. The goldfish returned. 5-month memory. I imagine how much longer they could have postponed this and whether or not the fish would have returned. Interesting, right? Okie dokes. Next up, we have the myth, or maybe just more of a misconception, that bees die right after stinging someone or something. And in fact, what happens is that this only applies to honeybees. And it is just assumed that it happens with all kinds of bees, what it happens with wasps and hornets and bumblebees, but it really only happens with bees. And the reason this happens is that when a bee stings someone, they have backward-facing barbs on the back of its stinger, meaning it gets stuck into the item or the person or the thing that they stung. So when they pull out, what actually happens is its whole body is ripped apart. And this picture here does not depict that. That would have been too gory for this. But, so there you go. The only kind of bees, the only kind of insect that dies after it stings in that bee category is honeybees. So those are the only ones that you will see done for right after they sting. Others, like wasps or hornets, will actually just continue living and keep stinging people. Alrighty, last but not least, we got a very interesting one, and one that blew my mind. This one relates to trees. Here we have it. The myth is that trees provide most of the world's oxygen. And this is something that I grew up believing. Like deforestation, regardless of this myth being debunked, deforestation is horrible. And it has a really big impact on us as human beings and the world. But that aside, it has been believed that because trees are one of the largest plants, and let's just put sequoia there for example, right? Humongous trees. That because of this, and also because there's so much forest reaching up to the skies all around the world, that through photosynthesis, through that action of taking carbon dioxide and water and converting it into oxygen and sugar for them, that they are the main supplier for our oxygen. But in reality, marine algae are the biggest suppliers and the biggest providers of oxygen in this earth. Marine algae are like really tiny ocean plants that live in really big and massive colonies in the ocean. And they have been the main contributors for oxygen and have been photosynthesizing for millions of years. And fun fact is that scientists have estimated that between 70 and 80% of oxygen in the atmosphere is generated by this algae. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, I thought so too. Alrighty, that's all I have for you folks today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Have a good one.